Our speaker this morning is Erin, Jurich, Finney. I'm never quite sure what Erin, Jurich, Finney is going to come up with next. Maybe it's a solo trip to Niagara Falls. Maybe she casts me as Lear. Maybe she's going to dress like a unicorn and canter across Main Street. In any case, it is usually fun and it is always worthwhile.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, which he wrote this morning, thinking it was going to be Don who actually said the words. Surprise. All right, so good morning, everybody. You've made the excellent or questionable choice to come and see my talk today, so thank you. I'll be talking about family feuds today, but if that hadn't won the coin toss, it would have been cats. But since we've already missed International Cat Day on August 8th, I guess I'll just go ahead and spill the tea instead. So the idea for my talk today arose from some personal experiences I've had over the last few years as my paternal grandparents fell ill and eventually passed on. I've been thinking a lot about family feuds since, and the various ways they show up in literature and media and also in the world around me. And so that's why we saw our little excerpt from King Lear this morning. So that particular tragedy speaks to me because there are a number of elements in it that are similar to my own family's story and stories I've heard from others. So the stage was set for an 8th century BC British kingdom. The aging king decides that it is time to divide his kingdom among his 3 daughters, but they have to sing for their supper, essentially. The rest of the story follows King Lear as he is betrayed and abandoned by his 2 false but flattering daughters. To be fair, 100 companions is a lot to ask your family members to host, but I can honestly see how that went sideways quickly. King Lear ends up in the wilderness, nearly alone and going mad. The 2 sisters raise their armies each, and Cordelia comes back from France with French soldiers, and the bloodbath ensues. The 2 sisters fight over this one scheming man who betrayed his own father and half-brother. Goneril poisons Regan. Cordelia's French army loses to the British armies, and in the end, the kingdom is wrecked. Everyone concerned finds out they have been betrayed by everyone else, and most of them end up dead, because it's a tragedy, Shakespearean tragedy. King Lear himself dies of grief after Cordelia is hanged after she was captured. So this story from millennia ago, has been retold in various ways because it is so striking and it is such a cautionary tale. So on to my own story. So my grandparents had 4 children. There's my father, the eldest, and his 3 younger sisters. Growing up, my father and his sisters knew they didn't associate with their uncle, my grandfather's brother, or any of his family. And everyone knew it was due to an old rift between the 2 brothers from years ago. The rift was never repaired, and that entire side of the family is lost to us without any of us really knowing why. Several years ago, my grandmother started declining in health. Luckily, her decline was slow enough that all of her children were able to come and visit with her and help care for her, and her grandchildren and great-grandchildren made videos and sent pictures for her to enjoy, basically on her deathbed. It was hard not having a final goodbye in person, but I think everyone understood how delicate she was. My sisters and I did manage to come out for her funeral. While there, we took some family photos, and it was only on looking at them later that I was able to see the depth of the haunted look in my grandfather's face. My grandparents had been married for more than 60 years and had lived the majority of their lives in one house together. He worked as a lineman for the phone company, installing and repairing comm lines, while my grandmother kept house, raised 4 children, managed the finances, and collected Fostoria glassware. We think she had amassed a collection of thousands of pieces. This is one piece here that became mine after it was all said and done. Let's see. while I was in town for her funeral, I spent some time driving around Sacramento with my grandfather. He pointed out various landmarks, street corners, buildings, and each one was tied to a memory with my grandmother. It was touching to hear him reminisce in such a heartfelt way. Back at the house, he wandered from room to room, moaning, lamenting, calling for my grandmother, who would frequently return to his room to look at her portrait and talk to her. It was clear that this was a man completely lost without the love of his life. The funeral, memorial, and reception events finally over, my sisters and I departed while my father and his sisters remained to figure out how to take care of their father. Grandpa was 90 years old at this point, in decently good physical health, but of course utterly emotionally destroyed and clueless as to how to run the household. My grandmother had taken care of everything. My aunts, all of whom live in Sacramento too, stepped in to take turns watching over him, feeding him, playing pinochle, dominoes with him, taking him to medical appointments, cleaning and arranging for house cleaners, arranging for a daytime companion, and trying their best to distract him from his immense pain and loneliness. So much unpaid work goes into caregiving, right? I think a lot of you have experienced those kinds of burdens. Well, I mean, privileged burden. Anyway. So my grandfather was a rather difficult character. He had long been kind of a grouch. I've seen him throw grand man temper tantrums that would make a kindergartner blush. Everyone knew he had severe hearing loss. It had characterized our interactions with him for more than a decade. It turns out he also had rather significant memory loss that my grandmother accommodated and compensated for, so nobody knew how great the problems were. The years that followed were difficult for all four of the siblings. As is so often the case after the matriarch of the family dies, things become tense quickly. Old disagreements and resentments between the sisters reignited. Major disagreements about the nature and severity of Grandpa's health arose, as well as what to do about it. Grandpa chased away daytime companions hired by his adult children, because nobody was available as a full-time helper, because no one could possibly compare to my grandmother, and each companion was deemed inferior. I understand he was verbally abusive to some. Looking back now, I also think his dementia made any new face in his life into a potential threat. Only family members over the age of about 40 could really be trusted and operate in his world without too much pushback. Routines had to be established, as well as rules around alcohol. Grandpa had a history of alcoholism, and now, without the checks and balances provided by my grandmother, any alcohol left in the house was finished within a day. He would have a glass of wine, forget he had done so, stop by the kitchen again for another glass of wine, and so forth, with the end result being that one of his children would find him sloppy drunk, aggressive, confused, and soiled. Alcohol was permanently banned from the house after that. Ice cream bars served as the next fix. He would stop by the kitchen and grab one out of the freezer every 20 minutes or so, and then lament and complain when the box was suddenly empty. "Why doesn't anyone buy ice cream bars anymore?" he would complain loudly. The pressure to take care of him continued, the fissures between siblings deepened, and Grandpa kept deteriorating. He had a fall, a broken hip, a hospitalization, a stint in a rehab facility, and eventually came back to his empty house filled with memories, the familiar furniture, and my grandmother's conspicuous absence. What happened next is still hotly disputed if anyone tries to bring it up, and it possibly resulted in my father and aunts spending tens of thousands of dollars arguing in court over the events. So one side alleges Grandpa was over-medicated with pain meds on purpose after his return from the hospital. The other side is outraged and deeply hurt and offended by this accusation. One aunt comes to check on him, but does so in a drunken and enraged state and ends up yelling, scaring her father and her sister, and damaging the front door. Having been denied entry to the house to check on her father, who she was concerned about, she then shatters the windshield of her sister's car. The aunt who is inside the house sent me the video footage of the altercation from different camera angles, and it is not pretty. My grandpa ended up dying not too long after these events, and as you can imagine, that's when the disagreements and accusations really took on a life of their own. The allegations flew, lines were drawn in the sand. Extended relatives were claimed by one side or the other for their perceived support of one party. My father, who up until now had tried his best to stay a neutral party, threw his lot in with a drunken aunt, against my advice, and forever damaged his relationship with the other two. Suddenly, instead of a grieving family, they were a family at war, declaring allegiances and pronouncing other family members excommunicated, but with lawyers and briefcases instead of mounted armies. My sisters and I flew out for a memorial service for my grandfather several months after his death, and even at the service, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same. I made a point to visit some extended family members, even ones who had been excommunicated, and all three aunts, two of which I went to see in secret so as not to upset the opposing party. Not for any other purpose, just to visit with family and catch up, as you do when you're in town for a memorial. Later, I was read the riot act by my very own father and was told my visits cost the warring factions additional thousands of dollars in lawyers' fees. I had hoped time in a more advanced stage in the grieving process might heal hearts and allow for reconnections. However, at this point, I think their sibling relationship is permanently damaged. I'm now allowed, I will not get yelled at, to talk to my great aunt again, my grandmother's twin sister. And the estate and lawsuits are all settled, so I don't have to worry about a conversation with extended family costing someone additional lawyer's fees or producing feelings of betrayal. I have my spoils of war, my nice Fostoria pieces. I got a few. A couple old evening handbags my grandmother collected, and some other small items. I've reconciled myself to never seeing my grandparents' house again, which will surely be sold, and to never again having a large family holiday dinner in Sacramento. Things have forever changed. My sisters and I have agreed that we'll never let it come to this between us, and I hope we are able to keep our promise when we are challenged, which we surely will be someday, right? Surely. So as I've been musing on this situation over the last several years, I've been trying to pick apart the various points where this went so wrong and why it all stays so broken. What keeps coming up? So one thing that I keep musing on are the 7 deadly sins. So in learning about this, I heavily consulted Wikipedia. So I'm sorry if I got something wrong, but Jerry isn't here to correct me, so I'll just keep going. So the 7 deadly sins were originally written about by a Greek monk named Evandrius Ponticus, who lived in the 4th century. He became a monk and wandered around in the Egyptian desert with some other monks. One objective during this wandering was to avoid temptation from these 8 evil thoughts, which include vainglory, which I think is being overly concerned with your position in the world, pride, sadness, acedia, which I think became sloth, gluttony, wrath, greed, and lust. Eventually, these were altered a bit to become the 7 deadly sins we know today as pride, sloth, envy, gluttony, wrath, greed, and lust. So I watched a YouTube documentary about this, hosted by some medieval historians, Dr. Rachel Stone, Eleanor Janega, and Jost Joastra. So anyway, they talk about how the monks go on to continue to try their best, resisting these evil thoughts or deadly sins. Over time, those ideas start to become represented in the art of the period, with sins represented as monsters attacking naked humans in various ways. A lot of medieval and Renaissance artists got into depicting this. But this isn't an art talk, so I'll let you find your way into the various museums to go find that art on your own. Notable works of art include the Day of Judgment, which Michelangelo painted in the Sistine Chapel, and also William Blake, who made illustrations for the book God's Trombones. And others too, because really humans are fascinated by sin and punishment, aren't we? I mean, look at our media, look at our Google search terms, our tabloids, reality shows like Jerry Springer. I imagine in addition to the voyeuristic element of watching sin and punishment, there's also a sense of some kind of personal vindication that, hey, these people are doing awful things, but at least you're not that bad. Another interpretation of the word sin is debt, something that has to be repaid. So confession developed in the Catholic Church as a way of dealing with sin, acknowledging the bad things we do, and deciding with some help how to address it. Confession became one way of holding up a mirror to yourself and considering how your actions are affecting you and those around you, and ultimately, I guess, your relationship with God. The Celtic Church, owing in some part to its relative isolation on the islands, British Islands, kept different ideas and practices around penances compared to the Christian Church on the continent. The Celtic practices consisted of confession, acceptance of satisfaction fixed by the priest, and reconciliation. And I guess those ideas date back to the 6th century. Some authors argue that over time, the penitential Celtic books helped suppress homicide, personal violence, theft, and other offenses that damaged the community and made the offender a target for revenge. The practice of tariff penance was brought to continental Europe from Ireland, Scotland, and England by Hiberno-Scottish monks and Anglo-Saxon monks. In medieval Europe, many clergy also functioned as judges, so you had religion intertwined with the law. And of course, who could forget the Spanish Inquisition? Many of our laws in this country still require some form of tariff penance to this day, like paying parking tickets and fines, or maybe serving time in prison. Okay, so back to the 8 evil thoughts, or 7 deadly sins, as you will. So which one should we really watch out for? According to Gregory the Great, pride is the worst because it caused Adam's fall. And it also gives rise to the beginning of the idea, holier than thou. The holier you are, or perceive yourself to be, the more danger you are in of falling into pride. So then public penance, like wearing sackcloth outside and walking around bare feet in the snow to show humility, became popular for a time so that you could be sure you weren't getting too prideful, and people could see that you weren't getting too prideful. We don't seem to do that so much now in our culture, do we? Can you imagine walking barefoot down your street wearing a sackcloth for public penance? Yeah, that would take some humility. It would also make my neighborhood much more interesting. So, which of these evil thoughts or deadly sins helped to tear my family apart? And which ones do we see featured in the story of King Lear, not to mention more recent histories of political power plays as dynasties sought to keep their concentrated power? So I would argue that pride played a powerful role in both stories. King Lear wanted to be flattered and so determine his daughter's inheritances by their ability to flatter on the spot, instead of using his own best judgment, knowing their characters, or even taking advice from advisors. I think pride or vainglory influenced Cordelia too. She could have easily stayed in France and lived out her life as Queen of France, Gaul at the time maybe, instead of coming back with the French army to fight her own people. Like her own people, right? She seems to be cast as the heroine of the story, the true one, but in the end she came back with an army and fought her very own people and her own family. I think pride influenced my grandmother to hide how much my grandfather was declining from all the family. And so he was never assessed or treated for dementia, and nobody knew how bad it was. Pride influenced my aunts too. They each wanted to be and to feel very important and have the most say in how to handle grandpa and the estate. Greed certainly influenced both stories. Regan and Goneril all wanted the largest share possible for an inheritance, and other characters in King Lear also made decisions to betray family members and oaths taken for greed. My aunts may have been motivated by greed, and they were quick to accuse each other of it. Envy certainly played a role. Regan and Goneril each wanted the same romantic or political partner, this Edmund character. He was playing them against each other at the same time. I guess that one checks off both envy and lust. Envy had been a long-standing problem between my aunts. Who in the family was the most favored child for each parent? Who got the best gifts or the most attention? Thinking about the Edmund and Edgar characters in King Lear, so they were half-brothers. Maybe Edmund had been like a bloodthirsty and conniving character the whole time. Or maybe that first betrayal of his own half-brother was his gateway to the dark side, like Darth Vader. Gluttony also played a role in my family. Several generations overdid it with alcohol, and this led to more problems for themselves and for each other, and at a certain point, the problems compounded each other. Wrath shows up in both stories. My family didn't raise armies to battle each other or demand executions, but things were smashed, harsh words were uttered, lawyers were paid to go after the opposing party. There was definitely a sense of wanting to get the others. Sadness, too, had a role. I mean, of course, when we lose a beloved family member, we feel sadness. As for sloth, wait a minute. No, I messed up my talk. If you stay in sadness, though, and you start making decisions from a place of sadness, it changes the direction of things. As for sloth, this one doesn't seem like it starts a lot of wars or ends family relationships, but it seems to me like it's maybe more of an annoyance and a threat to one's own personal health or pursuit of goals. So that one's maybe not as applicable. So how could it have gone differently? It's hard to say. But, if we look at the heavenly virtues, which correspond and offer a counterpoint to each of those deadly sins or evil thoughts, I see some possibilities. For pride, there's humility. For greed, charity. For lust, chastity. For envy, kindness. For gluttony, temperance. For wrath, patience. And for sloth, diligence. So if we include sadness in that vice list, I think contentment could be a useful counterposing virtue. I didn't find that anywhere. I just putting that in. So developing the ability to find peace in the moment might keep a person from racing to squelch a momentary frustration or fill a void with a problem of a different kind. Asking for help is hard, and it takes a lot of humility. But asking for and listening to good advice in the right moment can save a lot of trouble. A mentor of mine gave me some good advice I've often repeated. Never worry alone. Self-control when you want something badly enough is hard too. So thinking about that greed, lust, wrath, vengeance, gluttony category. Having self-control enough to not give in to those impulses takes a lot of practice and determination. Giving in to the impulse of the moment when it is in one of those categories often proves to be a mistake. I think waiting a moment, taking a breath, refocusing, can help us make better decisions in those moments. I think a number of these vices are stumbled into more easily as a person gathers and consolidates wealth, power, and influence, and along with those, a sense of entitlement. I think the idea of inheritances and entitlement there stirs formerly peaceful family members to quarrel. So perhaps the monks wandering in the wilderness were onto something. Maybe we all need to don sackcloth occasionally, fast, wander about until we get our head straight.